Hi, I'm Pastor Dave, and welcome to this week's video. All right, I have a question for you. What causes you more concern, ISIS or climate change? Now, that may seem like a silly question, but Joe Rosenberg, who is a novelist, Rosenberg has a background in political leadership, basically. And his claim to fame is that every campaign he was on lost. He never won a campaign. But he got to know a lot of world leaders. He understood the world, the political world. So at one point in his life, he decided to do a career change. And he said, I'm going to write a novel. And this was about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And he wrote a novel. And basically, he just sat down and said, with all the knowledge he had and all the people he knew, he said, what if? And with the what-if scenarios, he wrote his first book, and it became a pretty good hit. He did quite well with it. And basically, what he was on to started to happen in the real world. So that's where his popularity became even more. So anyhow, he has a brand new book coming out, and it deals with ISIS. And in order to prepare for this, he hired a well-known polling research group to do a massive nationwide poll. And they were polling Americans on ISIS and how much they understood about ISIS. And before he officially hired this group, it was called the McLaughlin Group. Before he officially hired them, he contacted his good friend Rush Limbaugh. Now, Rush has 20 million listeners, and he was about to tell him what he was going to do. And Rush said, hey, when you get the results, let me know. I'll do a show on it. And Joel kind of said, well, is there a question you want to add to the poll? And Rush Limbaugh, and kind of jokingly said, yeah, ask people what scares them more, ISIS or climate change. Now, he thought that was a joke, and Joel thought, you know what, that might be a pretty good question, because we've been told a lot about climate change and so on and so forth. So anyhow, he added it to the poll. How do you think that poll came out? That's what this week's video is about. Now, ISIS. The questions were asked, how big of a threat do you believe ISIS is? Are we beating ISIS? Are we even engaged with ISIS? Are you aware of that as an American? Is ISIS okay? Is it bad? Are we winning or are we losing? Well, 63% of those polled, more than 6 out of 10, said the threat of climate change is greater than the threat of Iran and ISIS obtaining weapons of mass destruction, whether it be biological or nuclear. 6 out of 10, 63%, believe climate change was more serious and more dangerous than ISIS. That's unbelievable. Now, as you went through the poll, less than 10% of the Americans believed we're actually engaged in a war with ISIS. 41% believe that we're losing the war against ISIS, and 25% said they had no clue, they don't know. Now, when you look at this subject, the poll itself was pretty fascinating, and then he broke it down between were you a Democrat, were you a Republican? Mostly the conservatives felt that we needed to engage ISIS, we were losing that battle. The climate change, the way they said the poll came out was that it was liberal Democrats, basically, who came out and said that, yeah, climate change is a much more serious threat than ISIS or even Iran with a nuclear weapon. Now, in March, this is a few weeks ago, just a few days ago, our Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, he gathered ministers, foreign ministers from 68 countries. And he gathered them together just to put together a coalition and to brainstorm ideas on how could we better attack the problem with ISIS? How can we better attack them? And coming up in April, President Trump and Vice President Pence is going to do the same thing. They're going to host a summit for Sunni Arab leaders, and they're going to hope to ask the same questions. How can we join forces? How can we come together and take on this battle against ISIS? So you've got the Secretary of State doing it with 68 different countries. You got the President and the VP doing it with Arab leaders, saying, how do we get together and form this alliance, this coalition against them? Now, most people have never heard of ISIS before the summer of 2014. So for 3 years now, we've seen the devastation and the evil, the beheading, what they've done to mostly Christians and Shiite Muslims. But Christians have been the main target with ISIS. And when you look at 68% of the people fearing climate change more than ISIS, what does that say for our country? What does that say about how much we understand what's going on in the world? Over 50,000 ISIS fighters have been killed, we're told, in battle. In fact, ISIS now is kind of changing their thinking. What the State Department is saying is that many of the ISIS fighters hold foreign passports. So now they're sending the foreigners home, and they're asking them to start jihad, to start fighting, to start battles back in their home countries, wherever their passports held. And Europe and the U.S. are the two main targets. So do we have any ISIS fighters coming back to America? We don't know. What we know from what documentation has showed, we had about 250 Americans leave America and go to Syria and fight in the civil war in Syria. Did they meet up with ISIS fighters? Were they trained by ISIS fighters? Are they back home in the States? We don't know these things. We just have some very few numbers on what's happening. The U.S. officials believe that more than, again, 250 Americans traveled there. And right now there's over 1,000 active FBI cases involving terrorism. And it's in all 50 states. So it doesn't matter where you live in the states, your state has some kind of active file with the FBI for terrorism. So when you understand how close it can come to home. Now, many people in this poll were also greatly concerned that ISIS could strike here on our own soil, on the homeland. So it's just fascinating to me that a group of people, that a majority of people in this section of the poll, more than 6 out of 10 are more concerned about climate change than ISIS or Iran having a nuclear weapon. Well, anyhow, I just kind of want to make you aware of that. Joe Rosenberg's book is coming out. If you enjoy that kind of stuff, I recommend that. Obviously, I've not read this one. I have read other books in the past. He does a good job with it. He's a good guy. He's trying to do some good things over in the Middle East. In fact, he's moved his whole family to Israel to help out Israel and their neighbors with what's called the Joshua Fund. But it's fascinating to see how Americans are thinking. Hey, if you like this information, if you want some more information like this, you can go to my website. It's called Interpreting the Times. If you Google that, it's going to be all one word, interpretingthetimes.com. We keep you up to date with articles like this and information like this. We do videos weekly. We do weekly teachings as well to kind of keep you informed, just so you know what's going on and kind of can be prepared for what's happening and to know what kind of day you live in. So anyhow, I'll be back with you again next week with another video. Between now and then, hope you have a great week, and God bless you.